year 1841, in the quiet town of Hartford, a wedding promised to be the grandest celebration the townsfolk had ever witnessed. The bride was young, radiant, and draped in a gown as white as morning snow. The groom, proud and joyful, stood ready to begin a life of love and devotion. The church bells tolled, the air filled with music, and laughter spilled into the streets. For a moment it seemed as though nothing in this world could disturb the joy of that sacred day. But hidden among the smiles, a shadow stirred, a heart poisoned not by drink, but by envy. And before the day was done, those bells would no longer echo with joy, but with mourning. This is the haunting tale of Hartford's poisoned bride, a story of love betrayed, innocence destroyed, and a tragedy whispered about for generations. Hartford in the early 1800s was a place where every face was familiar, and every secret had a way of drifting through cobblestone streets like smoke from a lantern. The town thrived on gossip as much as on trade. Neighbors knew not just each other's names, but the smallest details of each other's lives: who was courting whom, which family was rising, and which one was quietly falling apart. To outsiders, it looked like the perfect town, a tight-knit community where children played in open fields, and shopkeepers greeted every customer with a nod and a smile. But beneath that surface, Hartford carried the same truths as every small town: envy, jealousy, and whispers of scandal. So when news spread that a young bride, admired for her beauty and innocence, was about to marry into one of Hartford's most respected families, the excitement wasn't only about love, it was about status, pride, and silent rivalries. Some came to witness the union with joy, while others watched with something far darker in their hearts. And as the wedding day approached, the town buzzed with anticipation, never suspecting that the very celebration they were waiting for would soon become their darkest memory. She was the kind of young woman who turned heads not because of vanity, but because of the light she carried within her. Her beauty was gentle, the kind that seemed untouched by the world's cruelty. To the townsfolk, she was a symbol of purity, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. On that morning, as she stood before her mirror, the white gown flowed like a river of silk around her, each fold carefully arranged by trembling hands. Friends whispered of how lucky the groom was, and how the union would bring not just happiness, but respect and admiration to both families. Her smile held no hint of doubt, no shadow of fear. She believed her day would be filled only with music, laughter, and the sacred vows of love. To her, the church bells would forever ring as a promise of a future unmarred by sorrow. But as the guests gathered and the air filled with celebration, a single unseen presence moved silently among them, someone who did not share in her joy. Someone who had come with a purpose not of blessing, but of destruction. The ceremony had ended in triumph. Applause echoed through the church as the couple exchanged vows, sealing what should have been the happiest day of their lives. The townsfolk spilled into the banquet hall where long wooden tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, and golden cakes laced with honey. Wine poured freely, and laughter rose high into the rafters. At the head table sat the bride, glowing like a star, her hand entwined with her new husband's. Guests toasted to their future, glasses clinking in a chorus of celebration. For a moment, it seemed as though Hartford had never known such joy. But joy has a way of blinding the eye to shadows. Among the cups raised high in merriment, one carried more than wine. One was touched by the bitter kiss of poison. When the bride lifted her glass, she did so with trust, with innocence. No one watching suspected the fate that hung suspended in that single sip. To them, it was a toast to love. But to her unseen enemy, it was the first step toward ruin. And as the feast roared on, the poison began its silent work. At first, no one noticed. The bride's laughter softened, her smile faltered, and she placed a delicate hand against her chest as if the room had suddenly grown too warm. A guest nearby asked if she was well, but before the words could be answered, her body swayed like a wilting flower. The hall fell silent. Then came the scream. The bride crumpled to the floor, her gown spreading across the ground like a shattered dream. Guests rushed forward, overturning chairs and spilling wine as panic swept through the room. The groom dropped to his knees, calling her name, his voice breaking with terror, but her lips were pale, her breath shallow. In that instant, the joy that had filled the air only moments before was torn away, replaced by dread and disbelief. The church bells that had rung for celebration now seemed like cruel echoes of a fate no one had foreseen. Whispers surged. What had happened? Was it faintness from excitement, or something far darker? As the townsfolk crowded in, fear began to spread like wildfire. And while the bride fought for her life, somewhere in that room, her enemy watched. Knowing the poison had already sealed her fate, the bride never rose again. What began as faintness soon gave way to silence, and by nightfall, the whispers had hardened into a single, dreadful word: poison. The once joyous wedding hall became a place of mourning. Guests lingered in shock, their fine clothes stained with tears, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had just witnessed. The groom, broken and hollow-eyed, clutched her hand long after it had grown cold, unable to accept that the love of his life had been stolen in a single sip. But Hartford was not a town to suffer quietly. Within hours, the rumors began to spread. Who could have done such a thing? Was it a scorned lover, an envious friend, or perhaps a rival family seeking to tarnish their name? Every household carried its own version of the story, each one darker than the last. Some claimed the poison had been slipped into the wine. Others whispered that the bride herself had been the true target of hidden jealousies long kept in silence. And as the town searched for answers, suspicion turned neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. The wedding that was meant to unite the town had instead left it divided, fearful, and hungry for truth. But the truth was far more elusive than they ever imagined. Despite all the suspicions, no culprit was ever named. The townsfolk searched, interrogated, and gossiped, but the truth slipped through their fingers like smoke. Some swore they saw a jealous rival leave the hall early that night. Others whispered of an old family feud, claiming vengeance had finally been served at the altar. Yet no proof was ever found. The bride was laid to rest beneath a weeping willow on the edge of town. Her grave became a place of quiet pilgrimage, where flowers were left by strangers who mourned a life cut short. The groom, it said, never recovered. His laughter faded, his eyes turned hollow, and he lived the rest of his days as though a part of him had been buried alongside her. But the story did not die with them. For generations, Hartford carried the memory of that cursed wedding day. Parents warned their children of envy's poison. Old men at taverns still lowered their voices when the tale was told, as though the shadows themselves were listening. And so the bells of Hartford, once symbols of joy, came to be remembered as the toll of tragedy. The bride, forever young in memory, remained a ghost in the hearts of the townsfolk, a reminder that even the brightest celebrations can hide the darkest intentions. The tragedy of Hartford's poisoned bride was never solved. No confessions, no justice, only unanswered questions left to echo through time. And maybe that's why the story still haunts us. It isn't just about a wedding turned to mourning. It's about how fragile joy can be, and how envy can rot even the purest moments. Every smile in that hall looked genuine. Every toast sounded sincere. Yet hidden behind the laughter was a single act of betrayal strong enough to change an entire town forever. Perhaps that's the most chilling part of this tale, not the poison itself, but the reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers don't come from strangers in the dark, but from the familiar faces sitting closest to us. So what do you think? Was this truly a crime of envy, a family feud, or something even darker that history has chosen to keep secret? And that's why the legend of Hartford's poisoned bride refuses to fade. More than a century later, it's not just remembered as a tragic wedding, but as a chilling warning of how quickly joy can turn to despair. Stories like this leave us with questions that history can't answer. Who carried the grudge strong enough to destroy such innocence? Why was no one ever caught? And could it be that the truth still lingers, buried in whispers and unmarked graves? What do you believe? Was the bride's death the result of envy, revenge, or something more sinister that the town chose to hide? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the theories we create are the only way to keep these forgotten voices alive. And if you want to uncover more stories like this, tales of mystery, betrayal, and history's darkest secrets, make sure to stay with us, because the past is never as silent as it seems.